Yeah, thank you, Daphne, for being our help and moderator. It's beautiful to have our first international webinar with people from literally all over the world. We've seen people from India, from Japan, from Belgium, from Scandinavia, and from the Netherlands, of course. So it's quite awesome to organize this, and that's what we want, to start a worldwide movement. And it's also very great to have Heiko Fischer on board, still having his coffee. And coffee is important for Heiko, also for me. Heiko is a very successful entrepreneur, and he makes the impossible possible. And that's actually why he's here, because his way of design thinking, his mission in life and in work is actually very inspirational. So welcome, Heiko. Well, to start with the first question, who is Heiko?
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. So the very first thing I need to say before I introduce myself, Arko, is and to you and Daphne, is that this is not the story of Heiko, really. This is very explicitly, we said that the company is built around not one guy or my name, but one of the first things that my mentor back then told me is, don't call the company like you, right? Give it another name, because it needs to transcend you. If you want to really have an impact with the organization, if you want to achieve any kind of greatness, it needs to be about the team and about the mission that you have. So it's really important for me to point out that when I was driving the company alone, I was driving it into the ground, right? So it took my co-founder, Angela, and the team that we have assembled now to really make a company out of this. And this is really important to understand for the philosophy of resourceful humans. But maybe to show you where I'm sitting right now, so that you get a little bit of an idea of where we're coming from. So you can see behind me this little garage thing, right? So this is a little hark back to the origins of our company. You can see here there's a street sign from Palo Alto, 367 Addison. This is where the original startup garage of Hewlett-Packard is, in Silicon Valley, that basically started the whole startup movement, if you want. And my dad worked for HP for 35 years, which is a crazy amount of time today when you think about how long people stay with companies nowadays. And HP was built on a very different foundation from today's companies. Today we're talking about venture capital, and it needs to have a business idea and everything. And these guys, they were just friends. They were Stanford graduates, and they said, hey, we want to do something together because, we survived the Second World War. We want to do something meaningful. What can we do? And they just started doing stuff and everything. They invented new men's urinals for the bowling. They invented foul line indicators. They ended up with measuring devices for Walt Disney, but they had no clear idea. They just tried anything. They were like entrepreneurs in the true sense of the word. And there was a very pivotal thing that happened. And why I'm telling you this is that I kind of got this sense of HP through the breast milk, right? So when my dad came home, he was a happy guy. He was energized. He felt that work was literally awesome, right? So I had a dad who came home and he was talking joyfully about work, and he loved to talk about what the company did. And sometimes that led to big disappointments, because my dad came home and he would say, hey, I have this new poster from the company, and it showed the space shuttle landing. And I was like, cool, my dad works for NASA. That is so awesome. And then he's like, no, we're the guys who make the calculator for the astronauts so that they can, calculate the entry vector going back to Earth. And I'm actually not at NASA. I work in HR at HP. And I was like, that's disappointing. But he saw HR as an architect of culture at HP, right? And it was a culture that energized people, that released their full potential. So going back to the story of Bill and Dave, the original founders of HP, they went to a seminar of the CEO Summit of America back in, 1948, right? And the question that was asked to the people was, is the purpose of a company? And the answer was generate shareholder value, of course, right? And Dave Packard at the time, he got up and he said, I respectfully disagree with my elders. I believe the purpose of a company is to make a contribution to society, to the employees that work there, and to the customers that we're serving. And there needs to be a healthy balance between these. We are not here to just make money. This company, Hewlett-Packard, exists to make a contribution. In order for that, we need to generate profit so we can make that contribution, but not the other way around. And I think that was a very fundamental difference to where we've gone wrong with the current state of capitalism, and why people were so engaged at HP at the time, and why they felt work was literally awesome, right? Because it was about them. It was human-centered capitalism and entrepreneurship. And that's, I think, something where later on in life, I found a like-minded person in Ricardo Semler, who also felt that it just made sense to involve people. It made sense to that people are more engaged when they have a say in the way that things are run in a company. It's not rocket science, right? And it's also not new. And that's why we have this garage here, because we want to say, hey guys, this goes back almost 100 years. This is not something new. And it's sometimes kind of funny that we're going to Silicon Valley, helping companies in Silicon Valley about something that they've invented and forgotten. So, but if I may, I would like to take you just on a journey.
Yeah. Because it is a garage.
Offices.
It is a garage, actually, where you are. Yeah, it was even a real car in it.
Exactly. So maybe this main meeting room that we have here is literally called the garage. So we were trying to honor the spirit of our origins with that. And there's a couple of crazy things here. So I mean, obviously you can see our company logo up here, and I just, for orientation, I will stand in the middle of the room and I'll just swivel around once so that you can see, this is quite a big room, and I will take you through it so you see what we're doing here. That's Arko's favorite here. That's the DeLorean behind me. But people always come in here and they go, holy crap, this is crazy. So, but everything in here has a purpose, right? So for example, if we look at the shelf down here, first of all, since we're heavily invested in technology, our mission is to help companies work as networks, right? So we use technology to help companies get into the habit with digital workouts to work in the style of a Semco or an HP, and in a more open world gaming approach. And we're using artificial intelligence for that as well, which is why we have Sony's little Aibo robot here, who's just taking a nap and recharging his batteries. And he can get very annoying. So that's the future of AI, annoying robots. But for example, what you see here are the new Nike shoes, which you might remember from Back to the Future. So these are the self-lacing shoes. So if I press the button here, over here, they're, whoops, it's on this side. So normally when you step into the shoe actually laces itself. What it does is that it can also connect to your Apple Watch, and it can tell you your pulse rate, how much you're walking, and that alone would just be a gimmick. But what we've taken is we've taken a very old ritual that people had at HP, and which I understand that was also present at Semco, which is management by walking around. So leaders were actually encouraged to walk around, have a coffee, engage with their employees and say, how are you doing? How's your family? What do you think about our strategy right now? What are you working on? How do you feel? So to approach them as human beings, and we're creating an app where you can literally digitize this workout, and you can say, you know what, with these new Nike shoes, we can connect to your Apple Watch and we can tell managers how much they were on their feet. How many times today they have walked around, actually talked to their people, or have they just been sitting on their butts doing whatever desk work they were having. So to actually get them up and working, right?
So your company is called Resourceful Humans, but if I understand you right, from that vision, you've developed a technology company, and the technology should actually support these resourceful humans. That's what you're doing.
Absolutely. So that's why we have made this wordplay from human resources to resourceful humans, because we believe that people are not just a replaceable part in a manufacturing process. We believe that the most untapped potential in organization actually is the human dimension, right? That right now we're trying to press people in outdated organizational models, which leads to the fact that they can't release their full potential. And what we've realized back from the experience of companies who've been doing this for decades, and this might be a WL Gore, this might be a Semco, the old HP, the Morningstar company, there are different models. The model that we believe in is the network organization. And the technology that we're building helps people to transform their organizations or set up their organization as a network rather than a hierarchy to release the full potential of the people. Right?
Is it a coincidence that the companies that you feel inspired by, like Hewlett-Packard and Semco, are a bit older companies actually? That's all. I think Hewlett-Packard is right after World War II, and Semco is of course 80s and 90s. That the biggest changes happened. How can it be that these sort of companies are actually now a source of inspiration in a decade which is totally technology driven, different actually than the period that Ricardo and the guys from Hewlett-Packard started? Why now, Heiko?
Well, I think because with what we are experiencing with digitization is a much higher level of human interaction, right? So actually the human element through technology is coming back into the focus. We're just getting it a bit wrong that we are usually focusing on the technology that connects people rather than the content of what that connection should be about, right? And it's the same in organizations. You know, we will talk about Slack, but we will not talk about, okay, what are you using Slack for? And that's where I think there's a big opportunity right now with what Semco Style is doing as well, is to focus again on that mindset of what is it that we're driving in the organization? What is the relationship between the people, focusing on the contribution that they're making? And do they believe in this contribution? And maybe as a first example, you were talking about this now with Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, but also Ricardo Semler. They had a different mindset. And this is something that we struggle with most when we talk with organizations. Like, for example, I don't know if you can see this down there. Those are our two RH Teslas down there. And recently Elon Musk, who was trying to automate the Gigafactory with just 100% robots, had to actually backpedal and say, I've underestimated the importance of humans in my factory. I can't automate everything. We need human ingenuity down there, right? And I think this is what leaders are finding out more and more, that technology is not the solution. Technology is a vehicle, right?
But I found the same when I was an internet entrepreneur. And as you know, I started an internet training institute shortly after I sold my internet provider in the 90s. And I found out that technology-wise, everything was possible. But the big challenge was actually to adopt the culture of the web, the culture which was based on trust, on transparency, respect, collaboration, sharing, and all these sort of things were very difficult for old-fashioned leaders to grab, to understand, to implement, because it needs nerve to be vulnerable enough to be transparent, vulnerable enough to give trust. And that's why actually technology became more expensive, because they didn't have the guts to really properly use it, to really see it as a resource that stimulates people. But how will you contribute to that with your company? Because obviously you have seen the same sort of problems. What exactly is needed for that?
Well, we actually made a lot of mistakes. So the main software that we are creating is called Network, and it actually helps to create a networked organization and a new kind of performance management system in the company. But we always experienced that we stumbled across the mindset of the leaders, just like you said, right? Technology was not the solution. And then we looked back at Ricardo Semler, for example, and I mean, for Ricardo, I think a lot of the things was health, right? I mean, he was running into a heart attack, he was losing his hair, so he was not happy with. He couldn't shoulder all the responsibility of inheriting a company from his dad, and he saw that this command and control was no longer working for him. We saw a similar example with a US Navy nuclear submarine captain who said he was very close to burnout and to also losing all his hair, that he had this line, he said, death is a powerful motivator to change. And we actually looked at the example of, his name is David Marquet, of why he changed the logic on his submarine and the USS Santa Fe back then from a command and control submarine to a network submarine where everybody was acting as captain. So why did that mindset shift? happen in the most unlikely of places, right? I mean, you could say, okay, these two guys in Silicon Valley or this crazy dude in Brazil, that might happen. But on a fucking submarine, are you kidding me? No way, right? So what we did was we actually, so let me take you here in this room. This is what we call the Santa Fe, the virtual reality room. You can see here the personal computers in the background that power the virtual reality goggles that you see here. And you can see that there's 4 stations. So we've recreated digitally the USS Santa Fe submarine so that people, leaders, architects of culture, go through the same journey, the mindset shift that David experienced on his submarine, the same difference that Ricardo experienced in Semco as a top-down driven organization and Semco as a distributed network organization on a submarine in a very closed environment. So basically we're doing Hunt for Red October Semco style, right? So what you see here is that on this, you have the captain's goggles, right? Then you have different stations. You have the navigator, you have the engineer, and you have weapons. And the leaders are brought into scenarios where traditional command and control style does not work. Everything happens too quickly. Everything happens too dynamically for one person to give all the orders. So they have to learn to literally change their mindset and their behavior to be working in a different way to respond to this new complex environment. So this for us was a huge learning to say, forget about the tools for a moment, immerse people in an experience so they actually understand why did these leaders who've been doing that decades ago, why have they changed their organizational nature so radically, and not in a way where a Heiko or an Arko stands in front of them and preaches it, but they experience it. That's the power of the gaming experience, right? And Arko, you've seen the submarine from the inside, so.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's actually it's a real nice experience. You are actually in the submarine, and as soon as you're hitting something underwater, you really get the stress of the captain. But the beauty is that you actually sense that there's a big difference between controlling people and being in control. And I think what needed in society is that leaders realize that if they control everyone, that's a beautiful picture, by the way. If they control, try to control people, they are actually blocking the speed of an organization. And I learned that it's important to be in control by being in communication with other people. And that's a completely different mindset. And we sometimes make the mistake that we try to control things and we think we are in control, but we are not. And that's actually in your game. It's totally clear. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why we say that the game really teaches you to turn followers into leaders, right? And the important thing is that right now there's a lot of hype out there about this new work and all of this, but people don't really have an understanding that there is a captain needed on the Santa Fe, right? There was a Ricardo Semler needed at Semco. There was Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett needed at HP, and there's a Heiko needed at Resourceful Humans. But the role of the leader changes dramatically in a network organization when you enable the full potential of everybody else to, did I give enough clarity to my team about the mission that we're on? Did I enable them enough in really communicating between themselves and the objectives that they share? And then actually you can see that you can step back, and a lot of the frustration and the pain that we're seeing in leaders today doesn't exist for leaders in a network organization, but there is an invest. You do need to act differently up front. Self-organization is by no means an automatism that just happens if you step back and say, well, just let the teams do it, they'll figure it out. That's abandonment, that's not autonomy, right? So this is really what we're teaching them here, to say, have an experience of why these leaders have invested in a different format, what that feels like and what it requires of you as a leader. Then the next step when you go around the office is you'll meet this guy. You've probably seen the beautiful picture of Arko arm in arm with Iron Man, right? Because we believe that at the end of the day, this is what it's going to look like. The technology that we're building is much like gaming technology. It's like it wraps around you. Right now in organization, it's very often like that you have to fit into a process. right? Whereas in a network organization, there's minimum process, and the process tries to fit around the people so that you actually get the best result for the contribution to the customer. And you also know, if you've seen the Iron Man movies again, that there's a very snarky AI in the Iron Man suit that always gives Tony very mean feedback sometimes to say, hey, dude, you know, if you go a little bit higher, you're going to ice up and you're going to die, right? So we also believe that AI in the future will be more of a companion rather than a big brother, right? This is very important that we have that discussion around the philosophy of how can organizations as vessels for good contribute to an AI that will power human ingenuity and not restrict it.
And this is the essence what you say now, because what I always have experienced until now in more traditional sort of organizations is that leaders always try to control things and use technology to control. Look at society, look at the tax authorities, look at it's always technology to control a country, to control a company, to control people. But you say no, we should develop it as a companion. What needs to change to really have that companion sort of feeling in the thinking of leaders?
Well, you were talking about control, right? And I think we must not forget that a lot of the control that we're having in organizations today, in parts, comes from a feeling of responsibility, right? People have not learned a better way of controlling responsibly what the organization is doing, rather than micromanaging and ordering people around. But we have to provide them with viable alternatives. What could you do instead, right? And that's where your question is going to, Arko. And that's why we parked the DeLorean in our office. So let's just step inside here, because what we're saying with the DeLorean, and clearly it's not a car, it's a time machine, right? Is that you need to go back in time and open these beautiful gull-wing doors and look at, well, what is it that made these organizations work in the past that really worked out? So we've boiled this down to a couple of principles, right? The first one, and we call this the first principle approach. And you'll find these in different variations at Semco and at other companies. At HP, they said responsibility should be always at the lowest possible level. In the submarine, for example, on David's submarine, it was authority to act should be pushed to where the information is. So the captain didn't give the orders, but the person who was standing at the reactor or at the missiles should be taking the decisions because they have the best information. Right now in organizations, we're usually having the decision power furthest away from the problem or the information of the customer. So the customer service department or the retailers in the shops, they're not really empowered to take strategic decisions. It has to go through a hierarchy back up, and then it gets diluted and it gets political, and until it comes back down, shit has already hit the fan. And then companies like the Swedish Handelsbanken, for example, they said the branch needs to be the king, right? So they have to interact with their customers in their local community. They have to find out, is there a big risk if we give a loan to this customer or not? This should not be decided by an algorithm back in Sweden. This should be decided by human beings. That is the best algorithm we have. But what you need for that, and that's what gets to the answer of your question, Arko, is transparency, right? There needs to be a high level of transparency of what everybody is doing, not as a measure of control, but as a measure of aligning autonomous teams. That's why we put the DeLorean in here to say, these principles have been around for a long time. And it's really important to go back to the past, take the best of what has been there, and then translate them into a digital future where these tools are not abused for more control, but rather to enable the human potential. So if I were to show you how we're doing this, then let me give you one example. So if I go over here to this is what we call the Tribune, right? This is I'm a big fan of the Eintracht Frankfurt soccer club, who are having a really good season. And they're also doing a lot on a very small budget. And since we have no venture capital at RH, we also have to do a lot with a little. I don't know if you can see this, if this comes through on the iPhone screen. So what you can see here is that we're literally visualizing the network of people in an organization and what they're working on. So you can see me, for example, I'm working with Raphael on a contribution up here, and everybody else can see that too. So everybody else could ask me a question and say, Heiko, why are you placing your energy here? Or why is that important? Or why is this a priority for you? So the entire organization is visualized as a network to the benefit of everybody, so that we have a very clear discussion around the alignment of our time and our passions, right? I mean, this is something that struck me when I read Maverick, that people were always impressed when they looked at Semco, and I think there was this famous BBC documentary where they went to the factory and they looked at it and there was nobody in the factory. And they asked the supervisor and they said, hey, how come nobody's here? See, this is not working. You have no control. And he said, these workers know when that product needs to be shipped and they are responsible to ship it. So if they're not here on Wednesday, maybe they're going to watch a soccer game of their kids, or maybe they're playing piano with their daughter or something, but they will ship it by Monday. I'm sure of that. I don't know where they are right now, but we have a shared agreement on the contribution, on the definition of done, not on what they're doing right now. And what we're doing is that to enable that on a large scale, to say, if everybody knows what everybody is working on, then you have maximum autonomy as to how you do it, right? Yes, but first it needs to be clear what you work on.
Yeah. Before I get back to that, Daphne is also moderating questions, and I see there's some questions coming in. Xavier has asked, how is strategy for the next years decided at the lowest level? How can you do that?
Well, not to confuse that, right? We say there's two different things. There's the what we do needs to be decided by a captain, but it needs to be validated by the teams, right? This is very important, that we don't believe in a consensus culture. And I actually think that, Arko, you might correct me, that this was a learning curve, for example, for Ricardo, to say that network organizations are very good at maintaining a system. They're not so good at disrupting themselves, right? So you still need a person who is a disruptor. And if everything is consensus based, you usually don't move much. It's very much groupthink. So you still need a captain who says, we're going this way. And then you can have a discussion to say, do we think that's a good idea, or why are we doing this? And you can gauge the level of understanding and the level of belief of the crew in doing that, which doesn't mean you're putting the goal up for discussion, but you gauge how clear is it to the people. But then how the people do that, once they've said that's a good goal, you need to get out of their way and you need to leave them alone, right? Yeah. I think that's the important part.
Yeah, well, I hear actually two things. It's about leadership, that's one thing. But in your answer, it's also clear that you also need to create the psychological safety to embrace differences. Because you say, if it's all consensus, you won't do any innovation. You need the differences to be able to do new things. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we split this in two things. We say there's clarity and there's competency, right? So clarity is created on the leadership level to say, where are we going? And then we need competency on the level of the employees to actually being able to work autonomously. And by no means is this usually there in the organization. So we always see a huge desire from teams to work autonomously, but once they're given the autonomy by the leaders, they find that they're running out of their comfort zone very quickly, because it's much easier to blame a manager for a fuck up than to assume responsibility yourself, right? And that's when people usually want to go back to, it was much easier when I could say Arko was an idiot, rather than, well, I guess we were idiots in making that decisions and what did we learn from it? So this is a step that needs to be leveled up very carefully. The big difference in the way that we do this at Resourceful Humans and with our technology is that in the past, it was this kind of approach: prove to me, Arko, that you're worthy, and I will give you a little bit more freedom, right? With our approach, we're saying, okay, create a little bit more freedom for your teams and help them grow into it. And then as a leader, look at the environment and see what are the obstacles in my behavior, in the organization, in the processes, in the culture that we're having for teams to grow into that, or what skill deficiencies do we have for them to grow into it and level it up. this can lead to huge frustrations. I mean, Ricardo certainly has gone through a lot of those. This did not work from day one. This was a years-long process to level up the Semco organization. On the USS Santa Fe, for example, David was saying that, people were dropping torpedoes in the weapons room, and he's like, oh my God, I need to assume command. I need to take control again. And I just had this 2 weeks ago with my own team where I was like, are you doing with the design? I need to step in, I need to take control, and then to go back and to say, all right, have I missed a level of clarity so my team understands what we actually need to do for the customer? So it's a very different mindset to create such a networked organization.
But it takes lots of discipline, and that aligns with two questions that have been asked by Nikolai and by a person called D. Becking. Nikolai says, well, how to get rid of the smell of power of the ex-manager? How to make people believe that what you say, when you say, I trust you, people believe you really do. And D. Becking says to everyone, how to overcome resistance from the top. They want to let go, but are a bit afraid to. Well, these are very much aligned, these two questions. What would you recommend leaders to do, Heiko? And to build in a discipline to really walk the talk?
Well, I think we had a very frustrating experience actually in the Netherlands with T-Mobile, where we were implementing this networked approach. And what we found was that people were not sticking to their commitments, right? And it's very hard to extract any kind of learning if you don't stick to a certain commitment, give it a certain amount of time to extract meaningful learning from it. This is one of the things, right now, agile is the big buzzword in digitization. And one of the crucial elements that's often missing in the agile adoption is the post-mortem, the actual learning loop of what have we learned in this sprint? What have we learned in this that we're not doing again, or that we should do more? It's very important in this new methodology to stick to your commitments, that your name is your bond, right? And I mean, we were talking about this before now with the employees, to say you have to hold your feet to the fire. The accountability is a key ingredient. So not only does the leader need to step away to create a space for the teams to step in, but the teams also need to clearly assume that responsibility. And what they find very often is that what you were calling the smell of power, right, is also something that smell comes from often fear, right? A lot of what we experience of bad behavior in the workplace is driven by fear of failure, right? Arko, you were saying this, to create a safe environment to fail. And the teams themselves need to change that smell to open up and to say, oh, we really fucked up here. And we're addressing this, and we're not sugarcoating it. We own that mistake. We have learned from it. It will not happen again. Here's what we're trying the next time that we're doing it. And this was the learning curve that also T-Mobile had to do. And that was something that, again, the leader at the time, Mark Klein, he had to ensure that failing was okay. That he stepped forward and he said, oh, I fucked up big time, and here's what I did wrong, and here's what I learned from it. And to make it safe for the teams to step forward and to say, failing is okay as long as you learn from it, which is why I'm not a big fan of these failure nights. Failure in itself is nothing. Learning from failure is important, right? And I think that is the important part, that you were describing this with vulnerability, Arko, that the leader needs to show nobody has the fucking answer, right? That there's this insane belief in organizations that the guy or the lady on the top has a master plan. They do not, right? They're just as much trying to bumble along and make it work as anybody else. They just had media training to make it sound better, right? Yeah. So that is a key ingredient, making it safe to fail, but demand learning.
Yeah, basically, if you make it safe to fail and demand learning, you stimulate a culture of experimenting. And you know, as no other, I think that experimenting will lead to new innovations, new products, new technology, perhaps. But what I found out the last few years is someone said it to me, actually, and I didn't realize the impact of the words. He said, well, Arko, hierarchy is far more in the heads of the rest of the organization than in the heads of the leader, which is true. From very young, we are taught that there is a hierarchy, there is a boss, and the boss is not always nice. And that is actually perhaps a nice bridge towards a question from Xavier, who said, well, how do you deal with politics in big organizations related to self-organization? Can we ever, if that thinking is so much in our entire behavior, the patterns that we build up in decades, how can we get rid of politics?
I think we can never get completely rid of politics. Politics is in a way is a very human thing, right? Let me take it step by step. We just had a wonderful experience. So David Marquet, the submarine captain, and Resourceful Humans, we've created a company together to make these virtual reality games. The company is called Arko Games, and they're based in Barcelona. And we've recruited very smart young talent straight out of university. They had no prior work experience, so no bad work experience, but also no good work experience. We are there first, right? So we were like, we're going to do everything right. This is going to be utopia. This is going to be awesome, right? So you had these kids who were like between 18 and 25 years old. And David and I, we were there, and we would say we're pretty much, you know, gurus of this network and intent-based leadership. So we know what we're doing. And we said, we're going to give you a workshop on this so you know what we're doing. And we sat in that meeting room and we said, okay, we're going to do a quick break, 15 minutes, and then you're going to come back. And we wait 15 minutes, we took a coffee. 15 minutes later, nobody showed up. So we waited 20 minutes, nobody showed up. 25 minutes, the manager there gets a little bit antsy, and he's like, do you think I should go and tell them to come back? And we were like, well, we're very clear that the break is 15 minutes. If they're not coming back, there must be a reason. Ultimately, we waited like half an hour, and then we were like, okay, we're going to go and get them. And we're like, hey guys, it's 30 minutes after we said 15 minutes. Why haven't you come back? And they said, oh, we thought that you were talking about something important because you are the founders and the bosses, so we didn't want to interrupt. I think that was a perfect example of what you were saying, Arko. And we talked about that just the week before in Leaders in Cars. The hierarchy was in their head, right? It was them assuming that we are more important as the founders and the bosses, so they gave us the space. And we're like, no, we're clear, 15 minutes. Guys, this is your workshop. You need to step up and say, hey guys, 15 minutes, you called it, let's do this. So it was actually a super learning for us to say, look guys, you are the same as us. We have a different role, we have a different responsibility, but that doesn't make yours any less than ours. If we say 15 minutes it is. You can say we need more, we need less, but then we're committed. And then you need to come in and you need to claim your time, right? It's really important that this hierarchy in the employees' heads gets challenged, because that also leads to this, I can hide behind it. Oh, well, they didn't call me back, so I didn't have to show up. No, we agreed on 50 minutes. You should have shown up and said, we've agreed on that, period, right? But that's a learning curve. Politics. I think politics mainly come, again, it's power and fear, right? I mean, look at Brexit. It's a perfect example for that toxic environment where it's all about power and nothing about actual sense making. You could solve that whole fucking process with another referendum, because either way it went, it would end the discussion, right? I mean, I remember when Ricardo Semler was talking about mergers and acquisitions, and he said, I would bring the question about the merger and acquisition to my teams, because I know the failure rate of mergers and acquisitions is usually 60 to 70%, because it's about fear. It's about politics, about losing my job, not believing in the synergy effects that we had on an Excel sheet. If I ask my team and they're bought in, they will even make a mediocre merger work because they believe in it. If it's a perfect merger and they don't believe in it, they're going to fuck it up anyways because they don't want it, right? And it's the same thing there, that in organizations, if you validate with your teams that whatever mission, whatever goal you've given them from a point of view of the contribution and the customer. So if David said on his submarine, hey guys, you know what, our mission is to safeguard the free world. And in order to do that, we're going to have to do a couple of things that we probably wouldn't want to do if we had a completely blank sheet of paper, some nice, not so nice things, because this is a warship with torpedoes on board. But still, it doesn't become about the individual opinion. It becomes about the mission. The more you can focus on the mission, the less you have politics. The less you have a mission, the more it'll be about ego and power plays and fear of oh, I will be replaced, right? For us, this was really important. What you can see here on the floor is we actually created our own business canvas for RH. So we have a very clear goal to say we want to evolve the human condition through work technology. And you can see a lot of kids playing on a healthy planet. Arko, you actually met my kids here in the office. They're very much integrated in the work environment and always welcome in the office, because we said we should make work awesome for the next generation, right? And then we have a value proposition underneath. How are we going to deliver this? But this mission is what we refer back to when we get into politics at Resourceful Humans. We say, okay, guys, let's step back from what does Albert think, what does Martin think, what does Heiko think, to are we honoring our mission? However, most companies don't have the clarity about their mission, right? When they have it, I'm not a super big fan of Google, but you can see that Google has a very clear mission in terms of democratizing information, and the fight that they have internally now about should we go to China with a censored search engine, and the employees said no fucking way. There was an internal rebellion about that, and that kind of politics is necessary. This kind of constructive dissent is necessary, but it's not politics, it's dialogue, right?
Yeah, interesting, because you mentioned Google, and they actually use technology to democratize information. But there's a question from Gabrielle, and she says, you're using technology to transfer experience. This is the major issue in learning. It is easy to transfer knowledge, but experience is much more difficult. Do you see that your methodology of transferring experience leads to deep learning? It's an interesting question. Does technology leads to deep learning?
Yeah. So remember, what we're trying to do in this
office
is to,
by the way.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. What we're trying to give people here when they step into our offices is to give them a complete experience from the VR simulation, the dive, how do leaders' behaviors and mindset needs to change, to where I'm sitting now in the Tribune to say, how do you scale that across an organization with hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, or in one of our cases, 100,000s of employees. We have a very particular intervention that we're doing. So as you saw, there are 4 chairs, so only 4 people can play at any given time. But we always do a workshop with 8 people. So 8 people, so 4 people are actually sitting here where I'm sitting now, and they're learning about the theory of the network organization, while 4 people are playing. When the 4 people are done with the first playthrough, they come and they come and merge with the other team. What we found in the past was that they started competing, because the mission of the game is you have to save people of a sinking boat in a very rough environment. And we found people competing on how many people have they saved. But we didn't want this to be a competition until we're like, crap, opposite effect. What kind of intervention can we create in the dive so we promote collaboration and peer learning and deep learning? So what we said was, okay, when the 4 people come over from, let me just step up here so you can see this. When they come over from the VR into over here, it's their job to certify their colleagues in having a better experience on the submarine than they did. They have to level the team that's going next on the submarine up to save more people than they did. So actually the goal becomes a collaborative goal, that the team that levels the other team up more, that enables more deep learning, is more successful. So it becomes a collaborative challenge rather than a competitive challenge. What we found there is that usually what people will do is they will go play by play. They will say, okay, you step on the submarine, then you need to go out of the harbor, then you take a left, and when you do that, then you need to shoot a torpedo, not knowing that we can change the gameplay at any time. So if I give you this kind of play by play, then we just change the game in the background, and all this play by play becomes nonsense, right? Just like in real life, you can't control that the next experience you have with a customer is going to run exactly like the last one. So what they have to do instead is they have to certify them in a sense of, okay, how comfortable are you with making a strategy? Okay, what you should do before you leave the harbor is get everybody clear on have they mastered the control? Do they feel comfortable and safe handling their stations? It becomes a very different exercise all of a sudden, which incorporates all those measures that Arko was mentioning before about safety, vulnerability, competence, clarity. So what we find is that the same thing with the network organization on a large scale later on, that the people start taking the time that they need for deep learning and then do the sprints much more effectively. But they also create spaces for this deep learning themselves. They learn how to create the right moments to enable their colleagues to level up.
Yes. Well, I think these are beautiful final words of an amazing webinar, because we are 46 minutes already doing this webinar.
As usual, overtime.
As usual, we are overtime, and we committed to 45 minutes. So unfortunately, we don't have time for other questions. But
Arko, can I end with one thing? There was a question about politics, and I just want to honor. You know, there's this wonderful video about the first followers, right? And since you guys are based in the Netherlands, the Netherlands organization of T-Mobile actually came up with this little sign on the laptop sleeves. I hope you can read this. So all the leaders had this on their laptop sleeves and on signs behind their offices. And it said, warning, this is a bureaucracy and asshole-free zone. If you don't treat all colleagues with respect, delight customers, turn followers into leaders, bring attention to and eliminate red tape, if you kiss butt up but kick down, say A but do B, you'll be called out and run off this company's property. So in order to prevent politics, the leaders signed up to a higher standard and asked everybody in the organization to hold them to this standard. And I think that was a key in their transformation from human resources to resourceful humans.
Well, I think this is amazing, because we want to have an asshole-free world and a world where people pay attention to each other. And that's what it's all about. We are now coming to the end of the webinar. I really want to thank you, Heiko, for your inspiration. And I hope you'll succeed with your mission to use technology to basically free the minds of people in the world and stimulate the innovation that's needed. I want to thank the audience as well for spending this time with us on an amazing combination of time zones all over the world. Thank you for that.